Coming up today, after weeks of parliamentary gridlock, lawmakers are finally expected to vote on the first of a series of economy and labour-related bills pushed by President Park Geun-hye. China calls for all sides to show restraint over North Korea's announcement that it plans to launch a rocket in defiance of UN sanctions. Plus, the Finance Ministry says it will front-load an extra $5 billion into its budget for the first 3 months of the year in a bid to boost growth and help exporters. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello to our viewers around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Thursday, February 4th, here in Seoul. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. And we start with news that South Korea has demanded North Korea scrap its plans to launch a rocket later this month. This comes after Pyongyang told international agencies it intended to put a satellite into orbit in the coming days or weeks. Song Ji-sun starts us off.
North Korea has notified the UN bodies responsible for maritime affairs and telecommunications that it will launch a satellite called Hwangmyeong-song sometime between February 8th and the 25th. Pyongyang claims the satellite is for Earth observation, but Seoul and Washington say it is almost certainly a cover-up for ballistic missile test. Very little is known about the technical capability of North Korean satellites or if they're even functional. Of greater concern is that any satellite sits atop a long-range, multi-stage rocket that is the equivalent of an intercontinental ballistic missile. Such a missile, if perfected, could be fitted with a nuclear warhead and used to strike the United States. Following a National Security Council meeting Wednesday morning, South Korea warned the North to cancel its missile launch, saying it would be a clear breach of international resolutions and would further destabilize the region after the regime's recent nuclear test.
At a time when new sanctions are being discussed following North Korea's fourth nuclear test, the regime's latest announcement is a direct challenge to the international community. Pyongyang must realize that any launch using ballistic missile technology is a clear violation of UN Security Council resolutions. North Korea must immediately scrap its launch plan.
South Korean officials say if North Korea pushes ahead regardless, the launch will pose a serious threat to peace on the Korean peninsula, in Northeast Asia and the world. Pyongyang's launch announcement comes less than 1 month after it conducted its fourth nuclear test, which it claimed was a hydrogen bomb, on January 6. In cooperation with the international community, South Korea, the US, and Japan are seeking the strongest sanctions yet on North Korea for last month's provocation. South Korea says it will remain at full military readiness against any North Korean provocation, including the rocket launch that threatens the safety and security of its people. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Now, China has called on its longtime ally, North Korea, to exercise prudence ahead of the regime's planned rocket launch. A spokesman for China's foreign ministry says Beijing does not want to see an escalation of tensions, but added China was not in a position to stop North Korea pushing ahead with the launch. The official also said the United States had stoked tensions and reiterated that China is not responsible for the North Korean nuclear issue. UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon has also made the UN's thoughts clear on the matter. He said North Korea should refrain from launching a rocket as the country is banned under UN resolutions from testing ballistic missile technology. Now, one of the biggest uncertainties about the planned rocket launch is when it'll actually happen. We all know for sure that North Korea will do it during a roughly 2.5-week window later this month. Our Connie Kim spoke with some North Korea experts for their predictions.
North Korea's last 3 long-range rocket launches have followed the same pattern. First, Pyongyang notified the International Maritime Organization, a UN body responsible for maritime safety, of a plan to launch an Earth observation satellite, and then it fired. This time is no exception. given that the focus among North Korea experts is not on if a launch will happen, but when. Some analysts say it'll take place around a widely celebrated national holiday.
The launch could be a celebratory message around Kim Jong-il's birthday, which falls on February 16th. There is a high possibility of a launch sometime between the Lunar New Year holiday and then.
Others say it won't happen until after the adoption of a new UN Security Council resolution currently in development. In the past, North Korea has carried out new provocations after it's been slapped with a new set of international sanctions. What's also important to note at this point, analysts say, is that China's nuclear envoy is currently in North Korea. Woo Da-wei traveled to Pyongyang on Tuesday to meet with senior North Korean officials, widely seen as a move to address the tensions triggered by North Korea's nuclear test.
If North Korea wants to use the launch to gain leverage in negotiations, it could drag out the timeline. If this is the case, the launch might not come until sometime near the 25th, the last day in the North's announcement.
With no certain date set for the launch, the only sure thing is that North Korea will increase its isolation from the international community if it goes ahead with the plan. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, the head of the UN agency that North Korea notified of its planned rocket launch says Pyongyang did not observe the usual guidelines when announcing its plans. Speaking to Seoul-based Yonhap news agency on Wednesday, Im Ki-taek, who is Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization, said North Korea is obliged to inform neighboring countries about the potential hazards of falling debris from the launch, but it didn't notify Japan. Im said that under established international guidelines, North Korea should have told Tokyo directly, as it would be responsible for rescue work in case of accidents in its waters. Based in London, the IMO is the UN agency responsible for improving maritime safety and preventing sea pollution. Now, in other non-rocket launch related news, lawmakers here in South Korea will have another chance to vote on the so-called One-Shot Act on this Thursday. The bill is part of a package of long-stalled economic bills pushed by President Park Geun-hye and the ruling party. Our political correspondent Ji Myung-gil has the details.
If all goes to plan, the so-called One-Shot Act could finally come up for a vote on Thursday after weeks of bipartisan wrangling. The bill almost came up for a vote last week before a fresh debate pushed it off again. Now it will be brought to the floor by National Assembly Speaker Chung Lee-hwa, who had previously been reluctant to use his position to introduce bills without bipartisan agreement. The sudden turnaround is thought to be the result of pressure from the ruling Saenuri Party and presidential office to move forward with the bill, which will relax regulations and provide tax cuts for companies that want to sell an affiliate or buy another company. The main opposition Minju Party objects to Chung's move. It wants to bundle the One-Shot Act with a bill on redrawing Korea's electoral map, which it says is more urgent since the next parliamentary election is just over 2 months away.
We are against the Speaker's decision to hold a plenary session on February 4th. The ruling party should stop acting unilaterally and cooperate with us to introduce the bill to redraw Korea's electoral map with the other key bills.
The ruling Saenuri Party says its actions are justified since it cannot trust the opposition. It fears that if it agreed to vote on the electoral map first before the economy-related bills, the opposition would refuse to hold up its end of the bargain.
Passage of the economy-related bills will create new opportunities in this time of crisis. The rival parties cannot be split on improving people's livelihoods. Now is the time to act. It shouldn't be redistricting first, but livelihoods first. We ask for the opposition party's cooperation.
Korea's electoral map expired at the end of last year. The National Election Commission says if Parliament does not find a solution by February 23rd, it will not only affect local campaigning, but overseas Koreans will not be able to vote because the Commission will not be able to assign them to voting districts. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
Now, President Park Geun-hye dropped by Korea's largest industrial park on Wednesday. During her stay, the president met with workers and stressed the importance of lawmakers promptly passing some key labour reform bills. Kim Min-ji has the details.
The Panhwa-Shiwa Industrial Park in Ansang, Gyeonggi-do Province is home to around 19,000 small and medium-sized companies. This is where components for cars and electronic goods, or what the government refers to as root industries, are produced. President Park Geun-hye visited the industrial complex ahead of the Lunar New Year holiday to encourage workers.
뿌리가 없으면 뭐 굴리는 아무것도 될 수가 없죠. 그래서 그런 자부심 가지고 여러 가지 어려움이 많으시겠지만 열심히 해주시기 바랍니다.
Park stressed the importance of passing key labor bills, especially an act regarding the protection of dispatch workers, intended at expanding the scope of jobs offered to workers over the age of 55.
The act is being opposed as the passage will create a lot of irregular workers, but we get a lot of orders and have to delay them because of a lack of workers.
정말 모든 방법을 동원해서 최대한 도와드려도 모자랄 판에 참 이런 안타까운 일들이 벌어지고 있어서 뭐라고 말씀을 드릴 수가 없어요.
President Park also emphasized the need to pass another bill aimed at fostering small and medium-sized companies as hidden champions. She urged the government and lawmakers to work together to pass relevant bills for firms to boost their productivity. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now, facing sluggish exports and weak domestic demand, the Korean government has announced a set of new measures to prop up the ailing economy. Hwang Ji-ae with the details.
Korea will front-load roughly $5 billion more of its budget in the first quarter of this year. The government expects the extra injection to boost the country's growth rate by 0.2 percentage points over the corresponding period. The amount of state funds set aside to support local companies will also be raised.
We plan to pour in an additional $12.5 billion in policy financing in the first quarter, focusing especially on helping local exporters.
And that will put the total amount of increased fiscal spending to shore up the economy during the first quarter at more than $17 billion. The measures laid out during an economy-related ministers' meeting on Wednesday come as exports continue to lose steam. The country's traditional growth engine dropped by its biggest margin in over 6 years last month, posting its 13th straight month of decline. To boost spending, the government will also extend a tax cut for automobile purchases to June, originally set to expire last year. Some experts are concerned that spending could flatline early this year as domestic consumption late last year was driven up by temporary government-led sales events. And another package of stimulus measures is set to be introduced later this month with a focus on boosting investment and removing excessive regulations to spur job creation in new markets. Hwang Ji-ae, Arirang News.
The Korean won has hit a more than 5-year low against the US dollar. The dip comes amid fears over the continued slide in global oil prices and the possibility of an additional rate cut by Japan's central bank. Lee Ji-won has the details.
Amid the continuous slump in global oil prices and stock markets, the Korean won-dollar exchange rate hit the lowest since July of 2010. The local currency closed at 1219.31 against the greenback, down almost 12 won from Tuesday's close. This comes on the heels of renewed fears that the oil glut will continue as hopes for a deal between OPEC nations and Russia to cut production dimmed, and the benchmark West Texas Intermediate lost over 5%. Concerns over additional rate cut in Japan have also aggravated the situation, as Japan's top central banker indicated that rates could be cut further if necessary. Last week, Japan's central bank decided to adopt a negative interest rate policy, introducing an interest rate of minus 0.1% starting mid-February. Asian markets were also affected by such global concerns. Japan's Nikkei fell over 3%, and the Shanghai Composite Index also declined nearly 0.4%. On the local bourse, Korea's benchmark Kospi edged down over 0.8%. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now, the Korean government has strengthened efforts to prevent the Zika virus from entering the country. On Wednesday, representatives of government organizations released a set of prevention measures, such as launching a 24-hour Zika virus infection response team and strengthening inspection of animal and plant imports. They also decided to sterilize all lumber imports in order to prevent mosquito larvae from entering the country. A set of special guidelines will also be released to help doctors deal with infected patients should they drop by the hospital. The government will disclose all Zika-related information and the current status of the country to minimize public anxiety. The Zika virus could be linked to microcephaly, which causes babies to be born with shrunken heads. Now, talks aimed at bringing peace to war-ravaged Syria have ended in Geneva after just 3 days. The United Nations insists it's only a temporary pause until February 25th, but watchers say the signs aren't looking good at all. The talk suspension comes as fighting rages on in Syria. The Syrian government, backed by wave after wave of Russian airstrikes, scored a major victory on Wednesday. A military source says President Bashar al-Assad's army cut the last supply route linking opposition forces in the northern city of Aleppo to the Turkish border. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said his country's air campaign will not stop until ISIS and extremist rebel groups had been truly defeated. Well, that's all we have for now on this Thursday morning here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you, as always, for tuning in, and we'll be back throughout the day with more newscasts. Until then, goodbye.